Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're stepping away from the usual headlines and jumping into a really detailed piece of research. We're talking about a very specific prophetic timeline that weaves together history, some complex numerology, and even celestial mechanics.
It's a really fascinating model. We're going to be tackling this methodology laid out by a researcher, Louis B. Vega, and he attempts to calculate exactly when the fig tree generation countdown might conclude.
Right, and that countdown is tied directly to the founding of the modern state of Israel in 1948.
It is.
The thing that really caught my eye here is the precision. I mean, the author isn't just giving a vague window. They are projecting a very precise 7-year period that they identify as the tribulation, running from fall 2026 all the way to fall 2033.
Yeah, and our mission today is really to understand how they get to those dates. The whole framework is built on this central analogy comparing modern Israel's rebirth to, ancient Israel's conquest of the Promised Land.
Using cycles of 4, 7, and 70 years, ancient law, and astronomical markers. So I guess the core question is, why does the author believe that the timing of the whole church age depends on getting this one specific start year right for Israel's modern countdown?
Well, it all hinges on a single premise, that prophecy is pattern. The idea is, if God operated with certain cycles back in the time of Joshua, then those same cycles must mirror what's happening with modern Israel, the fig tree, after 1948.
Okay, so let's unpack those ancient patterns then, because it sounds like they provide all the critical variables for the entire calculation.
Absolutely. The first variable is the ancient precedent for settling the land. When Joshua led Israel across the Jordan, it wasn't an instant thing. It wasn't an overnight occupation.
Right, not like flipping a switch.
Not at all. The sources are pretty clear that it took 7 full years to conquer the Promised Land. Only then could the tribal allotments be divided up and a real peace established. During those 7 years, stable agriculture wasn't really possible.
So that 7-year period of conquest, that's the first key factor the author brings into the 1948 calculation. What's the second one?
The second one comes directly from the law of trees, which is detailed in Leviticus 19. It's a law that governs how long you have to wait to eat the fruit after you plant a new food-bearing tree.
Okay, the law of trees, how did that work?
Well, the fruit was forbidden for the first 3 years. Couldn't touch it. Then the 4th year's fruit was designated as a special praise offering, holy to God.
So you could only start eating it normally after the 4th year, which means even after the land was stable enough to plant, there's this built-in 4-year probation period.
Exactly. And that gives us the 3 potential start time factors for modern Israel's clock. It could be 4 years, just the planting law. It could be 7 years, just the conquest time. Or it could be 11 years, the 7 years of conquest plus the 4 years of probation.
That makes a lot of sense just in terms of what it takes to establish a nation. But why is it so important to pinpoint this start date? What are they counting down to?
They're counting down toward the settlement of a debt, a national debt. And this brings us to the core theological idea in the research, the Sabbath debt. The countdown has to accurately determine when the Sabbaths of the land, the Shemitah cycles, truly began for the modern nation.
The Shemitah cycles. Tell us a bit more about how that connects to this idea of a debt.
Okay, so the law commanded that every 7th year, the land had to rest. It couldn't be farmed. But historically, Israel, well, they failed to keep these Sabbath rests. The author asserts this failure led to a debt of 70 years that has to be repaid.
And those 70 missed rest years become the time of Jacob's trouble, the tribulation, a time for the land itself to finally settle its account with God.
Precisely. And this is where the stewardship difference comes in. The author really emphasizes that the tribulation is about what Israel owes Jehovah under the Mosaic covenant. The church, on the other hand, is under the new covenant. It owes no such land debt, and so is positioned outside that final repayment window.
Okay, that really sets the stage. Let's move on to the 3 scenarios for the start date. We take 1948 and add those ancient factors 4, 7, or 11 years to find the real start of the countdown.
All right, let's start with scenario 1, the 4-year law of trees factor.
So we take 1948, add 4 years, and that brings us to 1952. Now, why is 1952 significant?
The author cites it as a year when the traditional Shemitah cycles are believed to have resynchronized for the nation. If you track the 7-year cycles from 1952, you get 1959, 1966, you eventually land on 2029.
So under that model, 2029 would be a key Shemitah year, maybe a prelude to a 2030 midpoint.
It's a possibility, but it's not the one the author prefers. They have a clear preference for scenario 2.
7-year conquest factor.
Right.
But wait, if the 4-year factor aligns with the planting laws and the Shemitah cycles, what's the fatal flaw that makes the author jump to 1955?
It really just boils down to the parallel structure. The author is looking for an exact mirror of the ancient timeline. The precedent was 7 years of conquest before settlement. So the logic is that modern Israel's countdown didn't truly start until 7 years after independence.
Mirroring Joshua's time exactly. 1948 plus 7 years gives you 1955.
That's the one. It has that structural consistency. And if you track the cycles from 1955, you hit 1962, 1969, and eventually 2032.
And we should probably just quickly mention scenario 3, the 11-year factor.
We should. 1948 plus 11 puts you at 1959. But the source kind of dismisses this one because a 70-year generation from that start point would end too soon, around 2029.
So we're locking in 1955 as the most likely start year for this fig tree generation countdown. And now we have to figure out the length of the generation itself.
And for that, the author uses 70 years based on Psalm 90. The days of our years are 70.
Okay, so if we just add 70 years to 1955, we land on 2025. But that's not the start date in the model.
Yeah.
This is where that nuanced adjustment comes in, the crucial plus 1 year completed adjustment.
This is maybe the most important part of the entire calculation. It's easy to miss.
Yeah, let's unpack this because it's essential for the whole 2026 to 2033 timeline. Why the extra year?
Think about it like a birthday. If you're born in 1955, you don't turn 1 year old until 1956, right? So if you're calculating 70 completed years, the span from 1955 to 2025 marks 70 years begun. But that 70th year isn't fully completed until the same date in 2026.
Ah, I see. It's a key distinction. It's not about the end date just being 70 years later, but that the duration has to be 70 full completed years.
Exactly. For a prophecy of a set number of years to be fulfilled, that final year has to be completed before the next era can begin. So you apply that. 1955 plus 70 years is 2025. Then you add that one completed year, and you get the proposed start of the final Sabbath cycle.
Beginning in fall 2026.
Beginning in fall 2026.
And that gets us to the working model. The 7-year tribulation, Israel's time of repayment, kicks off in the fall of 2026.
And it runs from fall 2026 to fall 2033.
Okay, this is where it gets incredibly granular. Section 3, the final timeline. The author uses these specific prophetic measurements to triangulate the exact dates within that 7-year span.
Right. They use a mirroring technique. The author calls it a prophetic chiastic, an inverted parallel structure. And it's meant to connect to the duration of Jesus' ministry, which is cited as 1,260 days. The tribulation is famously split into 2 halves of 1,260 days.
Let's walk through the specific dates. The proposed start date is October 30th, 2026.
And that date is significant because it aligns with Halloween, sure, but the author connects it back to the day Jesus declared the Jubilee, supposedly in 28 AD, on Yom Kippur.
So trying to link the start of the final 7 years to the start of Jesus' ministry.
It's all about patterns. So you start on October 30, 2026, you add 12,260 days.
And you arrive at the proposed midpoint, which lands on April 12th, 2030.
Right, and that date is Nisan 10 on the Hebrew calendar. Historically, that's the day the Passover lamb was selected, 4 days before the crucifixion. The author sees this as a marker for a midpoint event, maybe the abomination of desolation.
And then if you add the final 12,060 days from that midpoint, you get the proposed end date.
September 23rd, 2033, which falls on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And the author cites this as the possible date for the return of Jesus.
That is an incredibly precise triangulation. But there's one more layer of validation here, isn't there? The author felt the need for some kind of astronomical confirmation.
The final bookend validation method, the blood moon tetrads.
For our listeners who might not be familiar, can you just give a quick refresher? What exactly is a blood moon tetrad?
Sure. A tetrad is just a sequence of 4 total lunar eclipses. Blood moons happening in a row, about 6 months apart, with no partial eclipses between them. And historically, when these tetrads have occurred on Jewish feast days, researchers have noted that they often coincide with huge pivotal events for Israel.
Like the 1949-1950 tetrad after statehood and the 1967-1968 tetrad around the Six-Day War.
Exactly. The author sees them as these temporal bookends that mark the period where the church age and modern Israel overlap.
And this is where that wild 7,116-day cycle comes into play. How does that number connect the past to the future?
Okay, so the author calculated the total time span between the start of the 1949 tetrad and the end of the 1968 tetrad. That span, covering almost 19 years in those 2 huge tetrad events, totals exactly 7,116 days.
So the logic here is that this specific 7,116-day cycle is a fixed prophetic measurement of time. the length of one era of this fig tree generation.
That's the idea. And so the author applies this precise count starting from the first day of the most recent tetrad cycle, which began on April 14, 2014.
So if the past pattern repeats.
If the pattern repeats, adding 7,116 days from the start of that 2014 tetrad should land you on the end of the current era.
And what's the date that comes out of that astronomical calculation?
The result lands precisely on October 7th, 2033, which is Sukkot, or Tishrei 15. The fact that it's so close to the September 23rd date from the 1260-day calculation acts as a powerful confirmation of that fall 2033 endpoint.
And there's one final historical note that the author highlights as a sort of shocking synchronization.
There is. That date, October 7, 2033, the one confirmed by the tetrad cycle, is exactly 10 years to the day from the devastating October 7, 2023 Hamas attack. For the author, this triangulation, using history, generation length, prophecy, astronomy, it all confirms that fall 2033 conclusion.
Wow. I mean, to recap, we've tracked this complex synthesis from the 7 years of conquest, the 4 years of tree law, the 7 years of a generation, all the way to astronomical markers like tetrads.
It creates this massive web of synthesized data points.
This deep dive really just illustrates the incredible rigor involved in this kind of analysis. It shows you the dedication it takes to try and synthesize data that spans millennia, whether you subscribe to the conclusions or not.
Absolutely, yeah. And that level of dedication is what makes the research worth unpacking. It's an exercise in complex modeling.
So what does this massive calculation, this whole shift in the prophetic calendar, what does it ultimately suggest?
Well, based purely on the source material we're looking at, the start of this projected timeline in fall 2026 is linked directly to the conclusion of the Church Age Commission. The author posits this marks the departure of the bride, signaling the end of the gospel stewardship as we know it today.
So if that stewardship ends, who takes the lead prophetically during that 7-year period?
According to the source, the focus transfers entirely back to Israel's debt and redemption. The commission shifts to the 144,000 evangelical Jews and the two witnesses. This coincides with Israel reverting back to the law of Moses and the dedication of a third temple. Now leaves a pretty important question for you to think about. What does this predicted massive transition of prophetic focus from a global church to an exclusively national focus on Israel's debt and restoration under the law? What does that suggest about the unique nature of that final 7-year period itself? It implies a total reset of the spiritual operating system.